broadhead stuck him right in the side of the head. And I never will forget watching him run off with that arrow sticking straight out of the side of his head.
I saw antlers. Was one of those, oh my God, that's a huge deer.
There'd be tools lying around, and my wife would be walking around piles of sawdust.
I couldn't shoot because I couldn't shoot through that massive shoulder. This is a 10.5 foot, 1,500 pound brown bear.
Get recalibrated, be immersed in nature.
I went and cut a persimmon tree, and I made my first probably 24 bows out of persimmon.
That's how we dominated our fights, because we never got off the horse. We just kept shooting and battling.
As men, we have something in our DNA that seeks adventure.
I like nothing more than teaching this to other people, bringing people in from all walks of life and showing them this ancient art of bow making.
I've been bit by alligators and charged by bears, and I've been involved in plane crashes and boat flips.
I fell hard on my ass, and yeah, I chuckled about it. That really sucked. It was also a wake-up call.
My mother looked at me, she said, "Where'd you get that bow and arrows?" And I said, "I swapped my bicycle for it."
You don't go to Alaska because it's going to be super easy. You don't pick up a traditional bow because it's going to be easy. You do it for the challenge and the journey of overcoming difficult things.
He started forward, and as that leg came forward, I drew and released, and the bear was so big that the entire 30-inch arrow vanished inside his chest.
Welcome to the Bowyer's podcast, where we explore the ancient art of bow making, traditional archery, and the age-old pursuit of wild game. Together, we'll chat with masters of their craft to uncover the deeper why behind reviving the old ways in a modern world.
I just wanted to say that so far, all the times that I hunted, even the ones that I didn't shoot an animal, I had an amazing time.
All right. Good morning. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And welcome to the Bowyer podcast. We just finished up Christmas around here, and New Year's is 2 days away. I am not a night owl, so we'll probably do something relatively early as a family. And then I'll probably be in bed before whatever balls drop at midnight, because that's what I do every year. But I've been looking forward to the new year, and people talk about the cliche of new beginnings and things of that nature. But it is good to change the oil and dust off and start things from scratch. And I think at a new year, that's a good time to do it. So I'm looking forward to that. And we'll probably get into all that on another episode. But I just want everybody to close out this new year in thinking and counting their blessings. And I know 2025 kicked people in the nethers around the world for whatever reason. I just feel like that's been a lot of rhetoric from friends and pals that I know. But I think that I'm guilty of this as well. It's like everybody needs to sit down and think about the great things that also happened in their life this year and their family households. Don't focus so much in society and what you read in the news, and focus on the blessings you have close to you. In addition to that, life is easier that way. Before we get to our guests, this episode is brought to you by Bowyer Archery. I've been shooting a 3-piece Fred Bear takedown all year, and I love it. Bear has great legacy, and I like to support them, so you should too. And now moving on to our awesome guest, world famous, renowned historian, Mr. Gene Hopkins. How are you, Gene?
Set the bar too high.
Yeah, world famous. We're gonna add a lot of accolades with each volume, I think.
Yeah, how much do I have to pay for this?
Yeah, you just have to show up, brother. That's all I need. We've been doing pretty good. I think I talked about this on one of the last episodes, but man, we've been seeing growth on the pod this year, which has been really wonderful. And just, it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the folks like you that come on here and share stories. And I'm just the ding dong with the microphone. So I love it. I love to see the growth and to see that people are drawn to it, and that we're telling the stories of people that might not have their stories told otherwise. And it's great. So I appreciate you being such a key part of that, Gene, because here we are, we're getting on here every, 4 to 8 weeks and talking about icons of hunting with the bow and arrow. And it's awesome. I love it. I'm learning something every time we hop on the show.
That's great. That's the mission accomplished. That's my objective, is to use the catchphrase, keep the spirit alive. And that's truly what I try to do. These people invested a lot of their lives, a lot of their time and effort and sweat and tears into making what we have today and what we enjoy today. So it's our job to keep their spirit alive, keep their memory alive.
It really is. And a little bit of a tangent because let's face it, I do that. I was out here recently hunting with some folks that were younger. One of the young men that's in this little traditional bow hunting club that I was running this year, he got his first bear, and it was with a longbow or a recurve in this case. It wasn't a real big bear, but it was his first bear. And he met some. He goes, other than the buddy that's out here on the property with me, you're the first one I called. And that meant a lot. That really meant a lot that he called me when I asked, hey, do you need me to come help you haul it out? He said, no, it's fortunately the bear expired not far from where they could get the truck in and things of that nature. But being on that call list was really heartwarming. And he's a young man, young engineer, lives local out here in Eastern North Carolina. And he really wanted to get a bear, and he got one only four days before the season ended here. And was just so excited. And he mentioned, he goes, it was a lot big. He goes, I thought it was a lot bigger bear than it is. And I was like, you shot a lot of bears? He's, no, I told you this is my first one. I go, exactly, man. I go, there's no reason not to be raw, unfiltered unfiltered celebration right now. This is a huge accomplishment, a big milestone. And hunting in the swamps out here is hard. And hunting bears late season with a stick bow is really hard. And you should be really proud of yourself, because I'm proud of you. And I just love how, again, he's 10 years or so my junior, 11 years my junior. And every time this young man goes out to the property, he's like, hey, do you need me to put corn in the bear barrel or anything like that? And I reciprocate that, but I don't find that as common in like the 20 somethings. And I'm glad that I'm still seeing it. And then, talk about it much, but young Bear Newcomb, right? A mutual pal of ours came out here to bear hunt a couple weeks ago as well. And it was terrible weather. We had a cold snap come in, and it rained every day he was out here, and the bears were not showing up, unfortunately. But that young man, he gives me such great hope for the next generation of outdoorsmen and women, because he is humble, he is driven, he's bright. There's not the frat boy showmanship that we see in young folks on social media. And as you talked about the next generation, Gene, or passing, what the phrase that you've been using, what is it that you said?
Keep the spirit alive.
Keeping the spirit alive. It's working, because there's young folks like this, and I'm sure you have dozens of examples of this from young people, but man, it's working, because we've got folks like the two gentlemen that I just talked about that are doing it, and they're living it. Last week, we had an episode with young Sarah Ward, and she's in her mid-20s, self-taught traditional bow hunter, living out in Oklahoma. And like, as much as society shows us that like our youth are goofy and wacky and lost, it actually just tells us that all of society is like that. If you watch the news, you get around real people with real connections, and you realize that there's a lot of awesome things going on, and there's a lot of traditions that are being passed down, and there's some young people out there that are ready to sponge it up and take action.
I'm glad you said that. And if you don't mind, I'd like to tell a little story here.
Yes, please.
We talk about the young people like Bear Newcomb, who's going to be somebody that our sport is going to really benefit from. Bear is a great young man, but there are other people out there that aren't fortunate to grow up with exposure to the lifestyle that we have. Several years ago, through the Pope and Young Club, I had the chance to help with the event where we took young people, boys and girls from Big Brothers and Big Sisters organizations from around the country to the mountains of Colorado. And we spent 3 days with these kids who probably had never been off the concrete in their life, right? Big Brothers, Big Sisters kids. These kids grew up in a life that just, I'm sorry that I couldn't do more to help these kids. But anyhow, so we get them out there. Fred Asbell is organizing this. Marv Klinke, Judy Klinke, myself, some others participated in this. But we had one young gentleman, he was maybe 15 years old, from Fort Wayne, Indiana, come. His name was John. I won't give his last name, but John was in that era where the long black trench coats were in vogue for the trouble kids. And he was a trouble kid. And he came, and we're in the mountains of Colorado over the 4th of July weekend. It's hot. And John wears his black trench coat the whole 3 days. And Fred is talking to John, trying to break the barriers down with John the whole time. And John, he says, John, don't you want to take your coat off? It's hot out here. And John says, no, that's okay. I'm good. The last morning, we're getting ready to go home. John comes out of the cabin to go to the van for the trip back to the airport. He doesn't have his trench coat on. And I saw Fred, and Fred smiled. And he walked up to John and he said, John, where's your coat? And John looked at Fred and said, and it almost brings tears to my eyes to think about this. It did at the time. John looked at Fred and he said, I don't need it anymore. That was one of those moments where what we're doing, we can impact people. Somebody with a background as tough as what John had in 3 days, through mentoring, through friendship, and just treating him like a person, like Fred was so good at doing. John took that black trench coat off for the first time probably in who knows how long. Didn't need it anymore. Because it was his, that was his
security blanket, kind of.
Security blanket. That was his shield that he used to, don't mess with me, I'm tough. But he walked away. I don't need it anymore. So let's keep some optimism for the future. We have a lot of good people out there. We have a lot of young people out there that are going to be the next generation. So it's our job to help mentor them.
I like it. I like it. And that's a really heartwarming and touching story, Gene. And you mentioned that, yourself and Fred had mentioned it's hot out here. Do you need anything? Or acknowledge that he didn't have the trench coat at the end, which is probably even a stronger gesture. I've said this before. It's like sometimes I feel like mentors are an endangered species, and it takes folks of a certain age to also not just wait for the younger folks to come up and say, hey, can I get some mentorship or tutelage from you? The folks with I got a lot more gray in my beard these days than I did just a few years ago, to reach out and express the desire or at least willingness to help or bring somebody under your wing and things of that nature, because it's not always going to be the young people that are just driven and that say they want mentorship or guidance. Sometimes you just have to reach out like what you guys did and do that. And then once that veil is taken down, like the floodgates open and the world.
All we did was crack the door open a little bit for John. And through the weekend with Marvin Klinke and Judy Klinke and some of the others that were there helping, we treated John like anybody else. And I don't know that he'd ever had that experience before. So it worked. And so I like what you said too. It's our turn to be the mentor.
Yeah.
It's hard to accept because I still feel like I'm 19 years old. In my mind, I'm still 19 years old. So who am I to mentor anybody? But in reality, I'm 67 years old and I've got a lot of miles under me. Accept the fact it's my turn. Stand up.
Yeah. Even think of it in the workplace, because you were really tired, but I'm sure there were dozens and dozens of people that you mentored during your tenure. And at most of the workplaces I've been in the last few years, I've tried to start either formal or informal mentorship programs for like junior folks that are coming out of university and things of that nature. Because I think it's important and I recognize that it's important because I've had some exceptional mentors in life, in career, in academics. And I think it's important to have those folks there and not for any organization to have a bit of a framework. And then carrying that over to other things that are not professional, right? That are not part of your career and your tenure and your job, that might have a little bit more substance or depth and some emotion involved. I think it's harder to do that in the real world. And it's great that folks like yourself are recognizing and taking action. And now you got a little bit more spare time on your hands, maybe without the job, but now you got all these grandbabies and everything running around. So I'm sure that's taking up some of the time.
Yeah, it is. But God gave us a lot of things to be thankful for. Sometimes we take them for granted, and we should never take for granted that everybody else has the same opportunities that we have. Yep. So extend a hand, open the door, crack the door just a little bit. And you'll be surprised at the number of people who really want to come in and be part of your world.
Yeah, I think so too. And I know we got a whole volume to talk about here, talk about Compton, but as men, or maybe just as humans, but particularly as men, we're often our own toughest critics, and we question our value as to whether we're maybe worthy of teaching or mentoring somebody else too. Yes, a big takeaway is to not let your own self-criticism get in the way of passing on something good.
Amen, brother. That's a really good segue. Maybe we started that conversation just on a whim, but it's a great segue into today's topic with Will Compton. Will Compton was the mentor. He was the mentor of our sport. Why Will Compton? And I did a presentation at last year's Compton Traditional Rendezvous up in Michigan about Will Compton. And I started it off with that. Why Will Compton? Why did this club get named the Compton Traditional Bowhunters? If you go back in the history of our sport, Will Compton was the man who got us off the ground. It took Ishi to get the stars aligned, and that's really what it was Ishi brought Pope into the archery community, and then Ishi attracted Compton, and then Compton met Young. So it was through Compton that both Pope and Young learned how to hunt with modern bow and arrow. So Compton is the mentor to our sport, and we should see him that way. And that's why Glenn St. Charles, when he started the Compton Traditional Bowhunters back in 99, 2000, that's why he named it the Compton Traditional Bowhunters, because he wanted to honor the man he knew who was the father of our sport, the mentor who got us off the ground.
I love that. Yeah. He's our capital M mentor for sure.
Well, without him, Pope and Young wouldn't have gone down the path they went down.
And and I know we're going to probably get into, who is the watcher clockmaker that Barnes, is RS Barnes or
FS Barnes?
FS
Barnes.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll probably have a whole volume about FS Barnes at some point too. But doing a little homework before this episode, it's just, man, it really was a small world. And also recognize that a lot of stuff occurred despite these folks not being born in California, but occurred out in California because it was much wilder landscape and things of that nature back then too. So before I have any spoilers, I'll just turn it over to you, Gene, and we can start wherever you want with Will Chief Compton, and we'll move forward.
Okay. So let's just go back. Will Compton, as we said, he's the man who really got the sport off the ground, took it from people taking and going out with, you had one of two paths that you were doing. If you had a bow in your hand at that time period, you were either practicing archery as the Native Americans were doing with primitive equipment, almost fun and games, or you were target shooting with longbows, English style, at round bales. So it was Will Compton who came along, and he was born in 1863. He was born in 1863 in Flint, Michigan. Now think about this. When I think about the stars aligned, he was born in 1863. Who else was born in the early 1860s? Ishi. So Ishi and Compton were born about the same time, and their paths would meet about 50 years later and take us to where we are today. But let's go back to 1863. He's born in Michigan, and then his family moves to Nebraska, and he's 7 years old. They moved to Nebraska, and they lived near a Sioux Indian reservation. So Compton's spending his young man life living near the Sioux Indians, and he makes friends with a lot of the Sioux boys, and they're teaching him their ways of the bow and arrow. They're going out with their Native American style bows, and they're hunting rabbits, and they're shooting around, doing what boys do, what kids do. But Compton takes it seriously, and he goes out, and by 14 years old, he's already killed a deer with his bow and arrow, with his primitive Native American style bow and arrow at 14 years old in Nebraska. That's a pretty significant event. And while he's there with the reservation, he also kills an elk. He kills an antelope. Compton he's taking this bow and arrow thing to heart, and it's really growing into him. And it's more than just a toy to him now. It's a passion.
And this is all before the age of 20, basically, right?
He's 14, 15, 16 years old, and he's out there and he's taking this bow and arrow, and this is what he's doing. Then we're in the 1880s now. His family moves across the country and settles in Oregon. And they move across the country in a Conestoga wagon. And they're in a wagon train going across the country. So this is the setting there, the time period that he is maturing. It's still the Wild West. This is just after the Little Bighorn. This is a period of time when the West is being civilized, but there's still a lot of wild country out there. So he moves to Oregon. He gets married. He has his first child. And he's spending his time learning what is he going to become. He's a rancher. He's a farmer. He's a logger. He's dabbling in different things. And then he moves off to Miles City, Montana. And in Miles City is where he becomes, let's say, mature. He is finding himself professionally. He works in the coal mines there in Montana, but he works himself up from the coal mines into the bookkeeping area in the coal company. So now he's moving himself out of manual labor into bookkeeping. And he spends his time there in Montana, but then he moves from the bookkeeper at the mine to bookkeeper in a grocery store, in a local grocery store. And then there's the Great Financial Panic in 1893. Like we had the Great Depression in 2008. They have a financial panic. The store closes, and he picks his family up and he moves back to Oregon. All of that's just history. We know from that he was interested in the bow and arrow. We know from that he was more than just a pastime with him. It was a passion with the bow and arrow, but it's still primitive Native American style hunting that he's doing, shooting that he's doing with the native bows. Now, when he goes back to Oregon, he starts to study more about archery. He starts to study more about American archery, the history of archery in the U.S., and what is the current state of archery in the U.S. And he learns that some of the best bows in the world are being made there in Oregon. They're being made in Oregon because the U-wood availability there in Oregon is probably the best in the world. And there is a man there by the name of Friend Barnes, F.S. Barnes, who lives up in Forest Grove, that is making what many people would say was the best U-wood bow in the world, is made there in Oregon. So he goes up to Forest Grove and he meets Mr. Barnes, and he learns from Friend Barnes about longbows, English style longbows, horn knock, D-section, the bows that are more of the style that we think of today when we think about longbows, except they're D-section horn knock bows. Now, back up a little bit there. Remember, he's been, up until that point, he's been shooting Native American bows. He's been hunting Native American style. Around 1909, he forms the Los Angeles Archery Club. Now, he's beginning to organize archery there in California, one of the first organized archery clubs in the area. And he's still doing that with the Native American style bows. And he said at that time, he said later that during that time, he didn't know of another white man in the country that was shooting a bow and arrow. And this is 1909, 1910. And then here comes along in approximately 1910. We don't know exactly, but he learns through his study about Friend Barnes. He goes up and meets with Barnes. He works in the shop there in Barnes. Now, some people say he was working for Barnes, but Cliff Huntington has done tremendous amount of background research on Compton. And through his research, Cliff says that he really didn't work for Barnes, but he was working with Barnes. So was he getting a paycheck from Barnes? No, but he was spending time with Barnes, learning, because Barnes is making the best bows in the world, probably. He learns from Barnes how to make U bows, how to make the horn knock D-section U-wood bows. Barnes becomes ill. Barnes dies in 1914. Compton's now transitioned, I'll use the word transition, from Native American style to the modern longbow style of shooting and hunting. And he's Now, lost my train of thought there.
It's okay. Can I actually ask a question about FS
Yeah.
Barnes?
Sure.
And from an earlier chapter, we talked about Pope, right? Didn't Pope also, seek some tutelage from FS Barnes at some point?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So here's where the Pope transition or the Pope correlation comes in. So Barnes has died. Compton then spends time up in the mountains collecting yew wood. And he collects, by some accounts, up to 1,000 yew wood logs. And he's starting to make his own bows now. Wow. And he's starting to sell this yew wood back to England because the yew wood is becoming more scarce in Europe. We have a lot of yew wood. We have probably even finer yew wood than they had. So his market to sell these yew wood logs is pretty big over in Europe. So he's selling them and he's making his own bows. This is after Barnes has passed away. This is 1914. Now, this is where the Pope Compton connection comes in. So we know that Ishi was discovered, was captured, was whatever words you want to use in 1911. We know that Ishi is sent to the University of California, Berkeley, where he meets Dr. Pope, and Dr. Pope becomes his medical doctor. We know that in 1912, Ishi is shooting his bow and arrow out on the grounds of the anthropology department there, the University of California, Berkeley. Pope looks out his office window and sees Ishi out there shooting his bow and arrow, and this is spring of 1912. Pope leaves his office, goes out into the grounds there where Ishi is shooting. Remember, he was his medical doctor already. So he had that patient-doctor relationship already with Ishi. But he sees Ishi out in the yard shooting the bow and arrow, and he goes out and he says, "Hey, Ishi, that looks interesting. I think I'd like to shoot a bow and arrow too." And Ishi and Pope become more than just a doctor-patient. They become friends. And Ishi starts to teach Pope how to shoot Native American style, Indian style, bows and arrows, Indian style hunting with decoys and calling. And then in 1915, maybe 1914, Ishi is headlines across the country. People are coming from all over the country to meet Ishi and to see Ishi there at the University of California. Compton is one of those people that comes to meet Ishi in San Francisco, California, Berkeley, that area. There's also something going on at that time called the Pan-Pacific Exhibition there in San Francisco in 1915. Compton goes to the Pan-Pacific Exhibition. There's the Japanese archery exhibit going. Compton goes to the Japanese archery exhibit. Hey, I love bows and arrows. This Japanese archery exhibit sounds like something I'd be interested in. He goes. And while he's standing there looking at the Japanese archery exhibit, a man walks up and stands next to him. He turns and introduces himself and says, "Hello, my name is Will Compton." The other fellow extends his hand and says, "Hello, my name is Art Young." Are you interested in bows and arrows, Mr. Young? I have been a firearms hunter, shooter all my life, but I've never really shot a bow and arrow before, but I'm interested. So Compton says, "Great. Why don't you come back with me and I will introduce you to a couple of people I think you would be very interested in, Ishi and Dr. Pope." So now we have Compton, Pope, Young, and Ishi all under one roof, all spending time together. Now, Pope had been learning from Ishi, Native American bows, Native American Indians, Native American hunting. Compton comes, he brings with him fine English bows that he had been making under the style that had been shown to him from F.S. Barnes. Ishi dies in 1916. So we're going quickly through this as a background for the Compton discussion. Ishi dies in 1916, which leaves Pope, Young, and Compton behind. Pope, Young, and Compton now go off into the world, continuing their hunting with the bow and arrow. But now, instead of using Native American style equipment, they're using the bows that Compton has taught them has shown them. And he starts teaching them what we would more think of as modern archery, is where Ishi had been teaching him primitive archery. So this is that transition. Pope learned from Compton. Compton learned from Barnes. Young comes in, and Young is a natural athlete. He's a world-class athlete. He's a world-class swimmer. He would probably have been on the Olympic team if the World War I had not broken out. He was a world-class shooter with a handgun. He was a world-class shooter with a rifle and with a shotgun. The man was just naturally talented, gifted athlete. And he picked up the bow and arrow very, very quickly. So he became maybe the best shot of the trio. But Compton was, by all accounts, the father, the mentor, the one they all looked up to, the one that taught them all the bow and arrow.
That's really impressive. And also, what a unique synergy of all these legends coming together, right? Through.
Oh, yeah. You got to think about divine intervention. Ishi was the magnet that drew them all there. Ishi was the one that interested Dr. Pope in the bow and arrow. Ishi was the one who attracted Compton to come and be in that same time at the same place. And then here comes Young. And they're all now Pope, Young, Ishi, and Compton all together.
Yeah. Super impressive. Really cool.
So now we've got Ishi has passed. Compton has professionally done pretty well for himself. He moved on from being a rancher, a logger, to he was into real estate. And now his first wife had passed away in 1900. And that's really the reason he moved from Oregon down to California, was that his wife had gotten tuberculosis. And he moved to California to be close to his wife's sister so that she could help during his wife's illness. His wife passed away in 1901, I believe, and he stays in California. And that's the reason he ended up in California. But during that time in California, he'd gotten into real estate, and he was successful in real estate. He was not a poor man anymore. He had some means. Dr. Pope, obviously, is one of the best surgeons in the country, was pretty well off financially. But our Young, he was a newspaper man. He was a writer, and he didn't have a lot of money. So now Pope and Compton are wanting to go on hunting trips, and they're wanting to go on adventures and expeditions. And Young, being a newspaper man, I don't really have the money to hang out with you guys. But they say they're going to go to Yellowstone, and they're going to hunt Yellowstone in 1920. And they got special permission to go into Yellowstone. And Compton was going to go with them. But Compton had some illness in the family, and I've not been able to find what that illness was or who it was, but he backed on it. But our Young was so dedicated to hunting with the bow and arrow. He said, wait, on all these trips you guys want to do, he said, that's pretty important stuff. I want to do that too. So I think I'll just quit my job and I'll just go hunting with you guys. That's some pretty severe dedication.
Yeah.
For somebody that he's probably living week to week, paycheck to paycheck. And he says, I'm going to quit my job just so I can go hunting with you.
Yeah, man, that's a serious dedication. And just there's some risk involved there too, right?
Yeah. He was not married at the time, and he didn't have a lot of dependencies. And he was a free spirit. And he said, that's what I want to do. That's my life. And I'm going to try to make a living doing this. So Art, in my estimation, is probably the first showman bow hunter, the first guy out there really trying to make a living with this sport. And he's doing he made his movie, Alaskan Adventure. He's going around the country showing his movie at the movie theaters around the country. And he's doing talks, and he's making some money selling some articles and things. And so he's the first guy that's really trying to make a living as a bow hunter. Now, Compton's also going out and doing talks about bow hunting, but he's doing it not to make a living. He's doing it to promote the sport. And Compton's going to a lot of different clubs and talking about hunting with the bow and arrow and recruiting people into the sport. So he's again, back to the mentor we talked about earlier. He's not trying to make a living at this. He doesn't necessarily need the money, but he loves the sport. He wants to build the sport. He wants to grow the sport. He wants to attract new people into the sport. So Compton's going around the area, not the country, but the area, California and the local areas around there. And he's a headline speaker at some big shows. And he's speaking at a lot of events and clubs and meetings and Lions clubs, Rotary clubs, and events like that. So he's very much, again, mentoring new people into the sport.
That's tremendous. And I also think that there's that standard or tradition has continued through Compton traditional bow hunters too. I think I personally have developed or befriended several mentors from Compton in the last couple of years. And I think that there's a lot of men and women that are taking that legacy of Will Compton into their own generation to bring folks anew and be the mentors of this generation. So I think it's really special that folks are taking that characterization of Will Compton and still bring into the future with the
I love what you just said there. And it's absolutely true. Back to, again, when Glenn St. Charles had the vision of the Compton traditional bow hunters. At that time, he didn't know what he was going to call it. He wanted a new organization that was dedicated to hunting with a traditional bow. And I talked to Glenn about that in that 1998, 1999 time period. He was asking me some questions and he said, what do you think about this idea of a new traditional organization? Now, remember, Glenn St. Charles is the guy who started the Pope and Young Club back in 1960. So some people would say, aren't you creating a new club that's going to compete with the club that you created years ago? No, he said, I want to create an organization where people get back to the roots of our sport. And the roots of our sport are having fun. The roots of our sport are taking a bow and arrow into the woods for enjoyment, not necessarily to kill the most and the biggest, but to have fun. And so he said, that's what I want to do. And we talked about how to do it. And I can remember very clearly, he was telling me his vision of how the Compton traditional bow hunters would grow. And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to have fun. And people are going to look at us and they're going to say, wow, they're having a lot of fun over there. When I go to a shoot, it's so stressful. Everybody is, hey, don't make any noise. I'm aiming right now. Don't make any noise while I'm back at full draw. You'll distract me. He said, no, that we're going to have fun. And they're going to look over and they're going to see how much fun we're having and they're going to want to be part of it. And that was his vision for Compton. And when he chose the name Compton, to name the club after Will Compton, it was probably the perfect guy to name it after. Back to the mentoring and Glenn's vision of what Compton is going to be. And I think if you look through the organization's history and you see the people like Brian Burkhart and Jim Eckhout and all the people that have, Floyd Wells with his youth program that he's done there at the Rendezvous every year, the people that are part of Compton are not in it for themselves. They're not promoting themselves. They're not talking about their successes with the bow and arrow. They've got many successes. Right. They're not talking about their successes. They're talking about the sport. And they're talking about having fun. And they're talking about growing. And they're talking about bringing people in. And I think that's exactly the thing that Will Compton would have appreciated.
I agree. Yeah. And all those names that you just listed are really exceptional humans. And it's being passed on. And again, I think whether they're board members or officers of sorts in Compton or just active members, I think a lot of folks recognize that and are just by virtue or are passing that legacy on.
I think, yeah, when you sit around, when I talk to new people about, are you a member of the Compton Traditional Bow Hunters? And I think you should be, and I think you should be a member of the PBS, Traditional Bow Hunter Society. Two great organizations. And also Pope and Young is a great organization. But if you're part of those organizations and you come to their events, you cannot help but to be impressed by the people. There is no egos. Everybody is equals when we're in the room. And everybody is treating you with the same respect that you would expect you would want. So I encourage people to come to the rendezvous with Compton, come to the convention with PBS this March in Indianapolis, and find out what kind of people we're talking about. I think you're going to find out that these are the kind of people you want to hang around with.
Yeah, it's good groups of humans, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So Compton's recognizes that he can't afford to go to Africa or on safari or something like that, but this
Well,
Yellowstone.
he probably could afford. Young
Okay.
was the one who couldn't.
Oh.
But Young was able to scrape together. But Compton, he was not a poor man. He through his real estate businesses, he'd made a fair amount of money. He wasn't rich, but he was okay. But then he's getting older. He's Young, Hope are both younger than him. And his family commitments and his business commitments are more of what held him back than it was his financial situation.
Am I wrong? And he's always been like, when you told about his early life, when he was a teen and first took up the stick and string, all those deer and antelope and even I think a bison were taken within the 100-mile radius of his home or something. Like he's
in Nebraska.
Right. At the time. Yeah. So he's always been pretty good about like staying within driving distance and finding an adventure.
Yeah. He was able to find adventure without having to go off to places like Alaska or Africa. Now, he said he would like to do that, but for him, his family commitments and his business commitments were more important at that stage in his life.
Sure.
Now, as a younger man, again, Art and Saxton were both younger men, so they still had the adventure bug, and he was older, more mature. And so the family and the business commitments were more important to him at that time in his life. So we go ahead, and they spend a lot of time hunting together. Art Young had moved off to Arizona, and not a lot of people know that Art Young moved to Arizona for a while and was staying with a friend of his there in Arizona. In 1922, Compton and Art and this other gentleman, his name was Donan Smith, spent several months hunting there in Arizona. They were hunting bears and mountain lions in Arizona, and I know you're interested in hunting bears, and that's a cool story. And they didn't have a lot of luck with their hunts, but they had a lot of fun, and they wrote some good stories about that. And then we go fast forward a little bit to 1926. In 1926, Art and Saxton had just come back from their African safari, and Hope had written the book Adventurous Bowman in 1926 and had published his book. And Hope and Compton and Stanley Spencer are out practicing, getting ready for a deer hunt they're going to go on. And it's late July 1926. And while they're out practicing, Hope just suddenly becomes very ill. And he has to leave the practice, and he actually gets admitted to the hospital. And he goes from shooting his bow and arrow, practicing for a deer hunt, to 9 days later, he's dead of pneumonia. So that was a point in Compton's life where Pope and he were very good friends. And Pope's now gone. And Art's spending a lot of time back in Chicago. And Art's spending a lot of time out doing his movie and his talks and things like that. And then Art dies in 1935 of a ruptured appendix. So Compton's now the last of the four. Ishi is dead. Pope is dead. Young is dead. And Compton's the last man standing. Compton had been interested, and I think this is another part of the Compton story not a lot of people know, but Compton had been interested in becoming and selling, making and selling archery equipment. And we see a few popping up every now and then, and I've got a Compton bow here I'll pick up. But this is one of Compton's bows.
Wow.
You'll find a few. They're very rare. They're hard to find.
Also, it's also a softer wood too, right? It's not an Osage or a hickory. It's
Yeah, this is, I don't know, you probably can't see it, but it's got his name stamped in the riser here. But he and Stanley Spencer were going to start making and selling archery equipment. And this is back as far as 1928. So we see why there may be a couple of dozen Compton bows that I know of in collections. I've got 7 or 8 in my collection. Why so many Compton bows out there? It's because he was making them for the market. He was going to start selling them. As early as 1928, he and Stanley Spencer were making them and starting to market them and sell them. So Compton, he's on his 4th or 5th wife at this time. He didn't have a lot of luck with his marriages. Sometimes his wives were passing away. Sometimes they were getting divorced. But his last wife gets sick, and she dies in 1933. So now we've got Compton. He's getting up in years. He's now 70s. He moves in with a friend in California. And he spends the last 5 years of his life living with this friend. And he's, again, trying to make equipment and sell equipment and starting maybe to make a business out of archery. He dies in 1938. He and his friends are out shooting, practicing, and he has a massive heart attack and dies in 1938. Now, remember that he had been trying to make a business from archery retail. When he died in 1938, he was living with this friend of his. He died suddenly. There was no time to disperse his possessions. And 90 years later, 80-something years later, I get a phone call. And this guy says, "Do you know a gentleman by the name of Will Compton?" And I said, "Yes, I know Will Compton's story." He said, "Will Compton lived with my grandfather when he died. He was living with my grandfather." And I knew the story, and I said, "Tell me more," just to make sure the guy was legit, right? And he said, when Will passed away, his equipment was still in his bedroom where he was staying with my grandfather, and it stayed there in the bedroom with my grandfather until my grandfather passed. And then it went to my father, and now I have the things that was in Will's bedroom when he passed. Would you be interested in them? Obviously, yes, I'm very interested. So from that, I call it the estate of Will Compton. He had 6 of Compton's bows. He had Compton's quiver, his belt quiver, back quiver. He used it both ways, but this was Compton's quiver with his arrows and the 6 bows. And I can take out and I can hold in my hand the arrows here that Compton was shooting.
Yeah, look at that.
He died.
Are those rifle casings using it's like
no, they're a heavy cast. They're a heavy cast.
Hold them up just a little bit taller there, Gene, so we can. There we go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very heavy blunts. And he also had, which I think is maybe some of the best parts of the estate that I was able to get from this gentleman, he had all the letters from Art Young and from Saxton Pope.
Wow.
To Will Compton. So they're getting ready. Some of the letters were, they're getting ready to go on their African hunt. And they're talking back and forth. "We'd love for you to be able to go, Will. Well, I can't go right now because of commitments with my family and everything." But all the letters about preparation for the hunt to Africa. We're gonna go with this other guy. His name is Stuart Edward White, who happened to be an author. He was a rifle hunter, author, well-known gentleman back in the 1920s. We're going to go with White instead. He seems like a fine, upstanding man. I think we're going to have a wonderful trip. And then we go through a series of letters where they're writing to Compton while they're on the ship going over to Africa. They're writing about some of the competitions that were going on shipboard while they're going over to Africa. And remember, Art was a natural gifted athlete, and all these competitions they were having, from playing cards to running to doing all these different athletic things, Art Young was just winning everything. And they're exchanging all these stories back and forth with Compton. And then we have the letters after the hunt coming back. And this White guy, he didn't turn out like we thought he was going to turn out. He wasn't quite the guy we thought he was. And so this change in relationship between Pope and Young and Stewart were pretty significant during their time in Africa. And they came back, and Pope wrote the book Adventurous Bowman of the African hunts, a bow hunter's perspective. And White came back and he wrote a book of the same hunts, the same trips, the same animals. And White was hunting with a bow and arrow at that time, trying. And he wrote a book called Lions in the Path. So it's the same hunts, exactly on the same trips, but from two different perspectives. And it's fun to read one and then pick up and read the other. And White wasn't all that enamored with the bow and arrow. And Pope and Young took that very personally.
Yeah. It's akin to somebody not liking dogs. It's not really a trustworthy person.
Yeah. Your experience with the bow and arrow may not have been what you wanted it to be, but maybe part of that's your fault.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't practicing well enough. Maybe you weren't taking it seriously. So you can imagine the conversations the guys might have had. Yeah. I didn't have the trouble you had, Mr. White. So maybe you should look at yourself.
Very solid point.
So now we have Compton, who's now passed away in 1938, the last of the four. And he's forgotten up until Glenn St. Charles brings him back in 1999 when he starts the Compton Traditional Bow Hunters. And now through our research, we find, you know what, this Compton guy, he was a very significant man. Without Compton, Pope might not have done what he did. Pope might not have really gotten our sport off the ground like he did. Young probably wouldn't have met Compton there at that Pan Pacific exhibition and gotten involved in archery. And Young probably would not have made his movie Alaskan Adventures. Young probably would not have gone to the movie theater in Detroit in 1928, showing his movie and meeting a young man named Fred Bear. Compton brought it all together there and was maybe the godfather of taking the sport from a primitive era into a modern era.
Yeah. What a special guy, and kind of the humble glue that helped bring the other folks together. I think Compton is just as responsible for our craft and our sport and lifestyle as Pope and Young and Ishi. And I know that this might be bold, but I think without that grouping of those four personalities from different backgrounds, we probably wouldn't be where we are today or have the legacy and really the organizations that we have that value our rights as traditional bow hunters, privileges and camaraderie and stewardship. Without those four humans, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. I wrote down a couple of quotes here. This is back in the 30s and 40s, people were already recognizing the significance of Will Compton and what he meant to our sport. So W.B. Westcott was a president of the NFAA, National Archery Association. He was a big author. W.B. Westcott, you go back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, he was a very well-known person in the world of archery. So Compton wrote, or Westcott wrote in 1947, I believe. I wrote these down so I'd get it right.
Sure.
But whatever we owe to Pope and Young, we owe in still greater measure to Will Compton, for it's he who taught both of them.
Wow.
I think that's a pretty good recommendation coming from somebody as significant as W.B. Westcott. And there was another, Captain Cassius Stiles, who was a World War I ace. And Stiles was also a very well-known bow hunter in that area. He said that it's tragic that Compton, who really was the mainspring of the hunting idea in that trio of Pope and Young and Compton, is almost forgotten.
Sure.
And it took Glenn St. Charles in 1998, 1999 to really remember the significance of Will Compton and to bring him back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty beautiful legacy. And then the work that Glenn St. Charles has done to help. Again, we talked about different folks that have a brilliant story that might not ever be told otherwise. This is a prime example of that, of Glenn St. Charles kind of bringing Will Compton's story back and refreshing it all.
Yeah, that Glenn was aware of the story. Glenn himself, he got involved in archery in the late 20s, early 30s. Compton was still alive. So I don't know, at what point did Glenn really become keenly aware of Compton? Or was he always keenly aware of Compton? I'm not sure of that.
Sure.
I've never had the chance to ask Glenn that question. I wish I had. But it took somebody like Glenn St. Charles with that awareness and with that desire to keep the spirit alive and to keep traditional archery fun and to grow our sport. It took somebody like Glenn St. Charles to be able to understand that significance and realize, you know what, maybe back in 1960, if I would have thought of this, might not have called it the Pope and Young Club. I might have called it the Compton and Pope Club.
Sure. Yeah. Man, cool. What could you imagine have been at, like, what was the expo that was out in San Francisco?
The Pan Pacific Exhibition in 1915.
Could you imagine walking around on those floors and seeing some of these guys that are businessmen or recreational hunters or whatever, and they just meet and bump into each other and shake hands, and then they become great pals thereafter?
And they build a sport, they build a lifestyle, they build a culture from that meeting, those four people coming together.
I'm just thinking about the stories and the discussions they were having while sitting over a shave horse and working on U-bows, building bows, and talking about probably planning their adventures during that time.
Nobody's ever hunted Africa before. Nobody's ever hunted Alaska before. Yeah, you can imagine sitting around the campfire, the three of them, and saying, you know what, maybe we should do that. No one's ever done that before. What do you think, Art? Let's go up to Yellowstone and shoot some grizzly bears. What do you think? What kind of conversations would that have been to listen to?
Yeah, that'd be, man. I'm stumbling with my word because I'm just like, it just would be really pretty epic, I think, to be around and just witnessing that, or knowing the future is, this is when they said that thing that, and we know what's going to happen.
Yeah. That moment. But I'm very nostalgic. I'm also very romantic when it comes to history. I just love the stories, but the stories are still being told and the stories are still being written. I look, and I'm going to make an analogy, and maybe it's a stretch, but I want to make this analogy. Hunting with a bow and arrow in Mexico, which I love to hunt in Mexico. I think it's one of the last uncharted hunts in the country, in the north, at least in this continent. There's not a lot of people in Mexico. Now, we have some Americans going to Mexico to hunt, but there are not a lot of Mexicans that are picking up the bow and arrow, and even fewer that are picking up traditional bows and going hunting with them. And I've had the chance to go down there quite a few times over the last several years. And last year I had the experience to go down with Brian and Burkout and Jim Eckhout, and we hunted with one of our friends down there, Alejandro Castaneda. And he and a small group of people, there's maybe 6 or 8 of them, trying to start traditional bow hunting in Mexico, the traditional bow hunters of Mexico, something like that. So we have that going on today in another way with these guys trying to get traditional hunting off the ground in Mexico.
Sure.
Now, 50 years, 100 years from now, there may be stories told. Remember that time Burkhardt and Eckhout were sitting around with Alejandro and they were talking about maybe we need to form the traditional bow hunters of Mexico, or maybe we have a Mexican chapter of the Compton bow hunters. And that all started right there. History is still being written. And those campfires are still going today. And it's us sitting around the campfires instead of Pope and Young and Compton.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I love these things, like sitting around with guys like yourself and Gene. I think in the spring I'm going to be heading towards the Midwest, so hopefully we'll be able to break bread and share a few stories. But just with Monty and Brian and some of these other guys has been really pretty special to just sit and listen.
Yeah.
And then there's some younger guys like Chris Jasmine, for example, great hunter. He's around my age, depth of experience, longtime traditional bow hunter, and like seeing kind of these every decade or so, this different generation of people with different enthusiasm and perspectives and everything else. But either way, they share this passion to get in the outdoors, have a little adventure, and use the single stick and string. And I think it's really special. And I think finding things like you've talked about the Mexico piece. I know that Brian and the folks at Compton, we were working on trying to do, like, I think they added it to the Dream Hunt lineup, right? Going out to Molokai. And that was super special hunt and just offers high density of game that really don't want to come within trad bow range. But things like this, I think having a small group of guys and gals that have shared values around the campfire, man, like, it's pretty awesome.
That's back to the conversation again with Glenn, sitting around the campfire there. And we were at Cloverdale at the time when we were having this conversation, 98 or 99. And he was asking my opinion about starting an organization like that. History is still being made. History is still being kept alive. Keeping the spirit alive is not just looking backward. It's looking forward. It's looking at today. Keep the spirit alive. Keep it moving. Keep the chapters coming. Don't just tell the stories of the old days.
Start new ones.
Start new ones. Start new
stuff. I think Walk in the Woods is a great medium for that too, right? There's folks writing stories in there that are 22 years old, and there are folks that are in their 70s writing for Walk in the Woods. And I think that's a great platform. I think as there's more technology and things of that nature, is folks like Amani Browning that are happy to put pen to paper and to write books. And then there's the podcasts that are out and everything else. This is all really, really good. I hope that somebody with better penmanship than me is sometimes just starts collecting stories around a campfire. And eventually there's going to be another great bows on the Little Delta that comes out.
Yeah. The Compton publication that comes out is called A Walk in the Woods, right? You referenced that. Do you know the story of how that A Walk in the Woods title came about?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. So that's back to Glenn. And when Glenn would talk to people, not just me, but he was on a mission to go out and start this new organization, but also not just to start a new organization, but to keep that spirit alive of hunting with bow for the adventure, not for the big racks, not for the ego. And he would tell people, and I've heard him say this several times, that when he would speak at a banquet and things like this, he would say, you know what, we need to just go for a walk in the woods more.
Yeah.
And that was his message. It's not about killing animals. It's about hunt. It's about adventure. It's about campfires. It's about friendships and that walk in the woods. And that's how he would say it. So that's how the title came about. It was Glenn's kind of motto. Let's just go for a walk in the woods with a bow and arrow in our hand.
I really like that. Most of my hunting ventures are just hiking with a bow. So I try to pretend I'm hunting, but when I get home, I say I just need a long walk with my bow.
Yeah. I had Jay St. Charles make me one of his second generation Thunderbirds.
Wow.
And you got to name your bow. He says, what do you want to name the bow? This was not long after Glenn passed. And I said, I want it to be named Walk in the Woods.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Oh, it's real pretty and very nostalgic. I like it.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope that what I want is for the younger generation. When I say younger generation, you could be 50, 60 years old. You're still the younger generation. Mm-hmm. We need that younger generation to pick up the torch. The 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the teens. We need them to pick up the torch. And don't be pressured into thinking that you're not worthy because you haven't killed a big record book animal.
Sure.
Don't be pressured into thinking you're not worthy because you don't write articles in a magazine somewhere. The walk in the woods, the have fun. Let's go out and throw some arrows at tree stumps. Let's just go out and have a good time. Let's keep that movement growing.
Yeah, we have to, right? And it seems like momentum is growing the most in the middle of a hunting season or right before hunting season, right? But we got to remember the off season is a great time to invite folks go to the range with you or shoot bows that people have never shot a bow before, or pass on a book like Bows on the Little Delta or The Witchery of Archery or Hunting with the Bow and Arrow, and letting a buddy that's a little curious read one of these books, right? Or something like that and borrow it. And the off season is a great time for fellowship as well. And we're getting into that phase as well. I know there might be some coos deer in Arizona or Mexico or turkey season come up or spring bear, but generally the demographic is chasing deer and elk in the fall. And as we taper off the year, let's not forget our service to fellowship during the off season too.
There's one of the best things that I find to get new people interested and to have fun is just, again, to go walk in the woods, but take your bows, take your arrows, take some judo points, and go shoot tree stumps. Yeah. No pressure, no targets, no bullseyes, no 5-ring, no 10-ring. Just go shoot at tree stumps. That's going to really get them infected, I think, with the bug. And then there's a lot of these rendezvous and shoots coming up. They start in January. The Tennessee Classic, the Compton Traditional Rendezvous, the Whiskey City Classic. All these events are going on starting in January all the way up through September until hunting season's open again. Just about every other weekend, there's an event that you can go to and just go hang out, sit around the campfire and talk to people, walk through the vendor booths. Make new friends. You cannot go to one of those and not make new friends.
It's true. Yeah. It's very true. I was just talking to, I think it was Sarah Ward on the last episode, and she's very self-taught and everything else, which is awesome. And I was like, yeah, but if you finally, look, I'm not a big foam fest person that goes to a lot of the shoots. And this year I went to a few for the first time ever. And I've walked away with friends. I walked away with lessons learned, invitations to go hunting, all of these things. And I was telling her, I was like, she's out in Oklahoma. I was like, do you hear 3 or 4 groups that are in Oklahoma that are really active? Just show up one time and you're going to meet friends and you're going to learn new things, and it's going to be awesome.
And if you don't feel like you're ready to go out and shoot on the course, don't. Just go for the fun. Just go for the campfire.
I get on the course and I just tell everybody I'm competing for last place. That way I don't have much pressure on myself.
I'm still undefeated.
Yeah. Grief. Oh man, no, it's great. And Gene, I know we've got many more great people that we can talk about, and I look forward to them. Again, we'll try to we say we want to do it monthly, and I think we're probably looking at more every 6 weeks, but it's a new year. This is our opportunity to try to maintain the cadence, and I look forward to it. And hopefully we'll see each other. If not, I guess it will be in the Midwest this year at the Rendezvous, right? It's going to be in Indiana.
Yeah, it's going to be just north of Indianapolis in Noblesville at the Rendezvous. And then, are you coming to PBS?
I'm not sure. Not all of us are retired, so we've got to balance our hunting trips with our
priorities, Matthew. Priorities.
The wife is like, if you put things on the book this year without solidifying family vacation time, it's going to be a beating. Yeah. So we've got the family vacation plan. I think I got a little springtime, a little fall time, and trying to figure it all out. And I know my job is going to take their pound of flesh anyway. So I try to get my stuff scheduled in there. They're pretty good about it.
Yeah, I understand. And for anyone that can, look up the Professional Bowhunter Society, PBS. They're going to have their biennial, it's only every 2 years, convention. This year is going to be in Indianapolis. It's going to be March 13 and 14. It's going to be right near the airport. You can drive in. There's no place in the country easier to drive to than Indianapolis. And if it's cheap to fly into Indianapolis, if you want to fly in, the convention is going to be in a hotel close to the airport. You can shuttle over. It'll be worth your while. Just Google Professional Bowhunter Society, look up their convention, come. You're going to have a great time. I guarantee it.
They do. And they've got a forum. They've got obviously social media, and they do really good at having these PBS hunts. I know folks, one thing I've been wanting to do is actually go to the Blackbeard Island hog hunt one of these years and things of that nature. So what a great opportunity to have stewardship and hang out with like-minded folks that, even if the only thing you have in common is that you like to hunt with trad kit, it's a good time to collaborate.
Yep. And then I can't go away without saying, also look up the Compton organization, the Compton Traditional Bowhunters, and they will have their Compton Rendezvous in June in Noblesville, Indiana, just on the north side of Indianapolis. And it'll be a 3-day weekend camping, primitive camping, first come, first served, primitive camping. There's also a campground with full hookups, but I think they're pretty well booked up now. 3 days of nothing but bows and arrows and walking and talking and camping and music around the campfire and walk through the campground and people will have food being cooked over the grill, and they'll say, hey, come on over and have some. You'll never have seen those people before in your life, and they're asking you to come over and sit at the campfire and eat with them. So I just say, if you're thinking about getting your toe in the water, you got two great events right there to come check everything out.